Welcome back to True North Sports Talk Podcast, your home for Toronto sports and the biggest stories in all of pro sports across North America. As you can tell, Peter Barclay here, and folks, we are recording today in kind of a heavy-hearted day. And that is because the baseball world in general, and you know what fans we are of baseball here at True North Sports Talk, we are feeling a deep loss with ripple effects all of across baseball. And that is one of the best managers of my lifetime. Bobby Cox has passed away yesterday at the age of 84. Now, you might wonder why, to a kid from Canada, that Bobby Cox would be important to me. Well, let's just say that he coached our Blue Jays. He gave us some of the best moments in franchise history. He became a Hall of Famer. He coached against us in the World Series. He won a World Series. There was just all kind of things that we could point to that made Bobby a very important person in the history and the fabric of the Toronto Blue Jays. He is the man who took the Blue Jays to their first ever playoff appearance, to their first ever pennant. He won Coach of the Year, and we'll get to all of that near the end of the show today. We're going to spend a proper segment honoring his life and his legacy today. And if you love Blue Jays, or even if you're down south of the border in Atlanta and around that area, you're most likely a Braves fan, and this is for you guys too. And for anyone around baseball who respected what Bobby Cox was able to do. Bobby Cox was able to, and it looks like the Angels just tied up the game here. Let's see. Can't tell what the score is. Changed some things. Sorry, guys. 5-1. Holy smokes, what happened? Alright, sorry about that. A little bit of a bunny trail there. Alright, so beyond all of that, we have a lot going on in the world of sports today, as none of the sports world stops just for one thing. So we have the Carolina Hurricanes making NHL history last night. They are in the Eastern Conference Finals. They're awaiting their next opponent, which will likely either be Buffalo or Montreal. That series is tied at 1-1, and it got a bit of a late start based on the 7-game series that preceded it. We're going to talk about the Kitchener Rangers, who are in the OHL Finals. They are 2 wins from the OHL Championship and an appearance in the Memorial Cup. We're going to talk about the NBA's second round. That has a lot of series going on right now. We're looking at some potential sweeps, some potential long series here. And so there's so much to cover. We're going to give you everything we've got today. Today we've got, as we said, about 4 segments, as we usually do. NHL playoffs, second round, full update on that. NBA second round, full update on that. Full update on the Kitchener Rangers, as we said. And then we are going to talk about Bobby Cox. So, let's get it started. The 2026 Stanley Cup playoff second round is already producing pretty much everything we thought that it would. Starts with the Carolina Hurricanes. No team in the modern era has gone 8-0 to begin the playoffs until now. Last night, the Carolina Hurricanes completed the sweep of the Philadelphia Flyers. And that's saying a lot, considering in the modern era we had the Oilers of the 80s. The early 80s we had the Islanders. We had some pretty good Montreal teams up until 1993. We had Detroit Red Wings, Chicago Blackhawks, the LA Kings of the early 2000s. We had Dallas at a time was really good. You had the New Jersey Devils, Colorado, but none of those really good teams were ever able to go 8-0 in the first two rounds. So last night, and again, we're recording this days before we're posting it to the world. So last night, the Hurricanes swept the Philadelphia Flyers in 4 games with a 3-2 overtime win. Jackson Blake scored the winner at 5:31 of overtime, his second goal of the game. And the Hurricanes were able to defeat the Philadelphia Flyers, as mentioned, 3-2. That completed the Eastern Conference second round best-of-7 series sweep in 4 games. And with that win, the Hurricanes were the first team to go undefeated in the first 2 rounds since the NHL's 4-round 7-game series format was established in 1987. So those Oilers teams and those Islanders teams that were mentioned are kind of before what they would consider the modern era. But even they never went 8-0 in the first 2 rounds. All right, so in all of the NHL history, whether it's modern era or before modern era, they are just the 5th team in history to start with 8 straight wins. 8 wins, 0 losses. Let that sink in for a minute. The last team to sweep 2 7-game series to start the playoffs was in 1969. And if you were around back then, you know that would be the St. Louis Blues. So when the NHL was that was when the NHL was a completely different format. So what the Hurricanes are doing right now has not been done in the modern era ever. Full stop. Not much more needs to be said. It's not a fluke. You can look at the numbers. Frederik Andersen is the 4th goalie in NHL history. That is saying a lot, considering some of the goalies that we've had. You think of Martin Brodeur, Patrick Waugh, Jonathan Quick. You think of Dominic Hasek. You think of Jacques Plante, Glenn Healy, like Cujo, Curtis Joseph, Ed Belfour. You think of going back, you had Grant Fuhr. I know I'm missing a lot. Kelly Rudy, Mike Richter. Just trying to think of all the goalies that have been through this. So he is only the 4th out of all those amazing goalies to allow 2 goals or fewer in each of his first 8 starts in the playoffs. He is the first one to do it since Jacques Plante with the St. Louis Blues in 1969. Taylor Hall has been everywhere. Jackson Blake, in just his second full NHL season, has been clutch in all the big moments. The top scorer through round 2 include Mitch Marner. He's with Vegas, had a hat-trick the other day. He's got 13 points in 9 games. It's okay, Toronto fans. We should be over this by now. Yeah, we know. Tied with Quinn Hughes of Minnesota. Sorry, Vancouver fans. Taylor Hall of Carolina has 12 points in 8 games. Jackson Blake with 11 points in 8 games. So that's 2 guys on the same team doing some pretty spectacular things. Logan Stankoven has been a revelation. He scored his 7th goal of the playoffs last night in regulation. And the depth of this team has every line contributing, every player doing their job. It's textbook Rod Brind'Amour hockey. It is reminiscent of the 2006 era that Rod Brind'Amour played on and won the cup, because they were just a group of hard hat guys that you wouldn't have thought were the best guys in the world. And in 2006, they won the cup. And this, with their former captain, reminds me a lot of those teams. The Hurricanes, who reached the Eastern Conference Finals for the 3rd time in 4 years, are looking for their first Stanley Cup since the aforementioned 2006. Carolina is the 24th team in league history to win 8 or more consecutive games during a playoff run. 18 of them have won the Stanley Cup. So just a little bit of a side note, the other day I happened to talk to a friend who asked me a question: who's going to stop the Colorado Avalanche? Because they were on quite a run at one point. And the very first name that came to mind was this Carolina Hurricanes team. And he goes, I thought so too. So this is the real deal. They've been blocked for 2 years, maybe even 3 years, by the Florida Panthers. Well, they have a chance to not face those Florida Panthers this year. And so they should, you would think, get to that cup final that they've been looking for. The only teams that could stand in their way are likely going to a 7-game slugfest, and that is Buffalo or Montreal. Up here north of the border, we'd love to see Montreal back in the Eastern Conference Final, getting to that cup for the first time since Carey Price era. In Buffalo, I know y'all have been starving for basically since 2011, just for playoff hockey, much less winning like you did in the Hasek era. So either one of those teams I would love to see take on Carolina. Currently that series is tied 1-1. As of this recording, Game 3 is tonight, although you'll be on Game 6 probably by the time this airs. And so there's the secondary storyline with Carolina's run. The Hurricanes have been sitting on their hands. They will have been for a little bit by the time the next round begins. Rod Brind'Amour acknowledged that challenge, quoted as saying, how long we've got to rest or be off, we'll do it. I think the good part is we just literally had the exact same thing happen in the previous round, because Philadelphia-Pittsburgh went 7 games and they'd already swept their series, so they have a plan. Clearly it was okay, so we could follow that and run with it. I'm not worried about this Carolina team. Their coach will have them prepared, knowing anything about Rod Brind'Amour. They faced this after sweeping Ottawa. It worked then. It can work now. The culture and preparation in Raleigh is elite. We've seen that. And one more note from last night is that Matvei Michkov was a healthy scratch for Philadelphia. The 23-year-old former first overall pick in his first playoff experience had just 1 point and was a -3 in 8 games. So that healthy scratch is understandable. And it's happened to him twice in this postseason. That's a storyline that Flyers fans will wrestle with in the offseason. He's a talent. That part is undeniable. But they need a guy who can show up when it counts the most. There are growing pains for a young player, but that is a name to watch going forward. Jumping to the other series, Game 1, the Sabres won 4-2. Game 2, the Canadiens won 5-1. So, a classic home team bounce back. Alex Tuch has 4 goals and 3 assists for Buffalo so far. Nick Suzuki has 5 assists for Montreal. Lane Hutson has 2 goals and 3 assists. Game 3 is tonight in Montreal at 7. The winner of this series faces the Hurricanes, as we've been talking about, in the Eastern Conference Final. Whoever comes out of this matchup is going to be a massive underdog. One thing they will be, though, by the time they get there, is battle tested. Both Buffalo and Montreal have shown they can win in hostile environments. You can be sure Carolina will be that. This series is far from over, and for Canadian hockey fans, Montreal is our last hope. Think about that. The Canadiens went all the way to Game 7 against Tampa Bay in the first round, winning that thriller, and are now in the second round. Martin St. Louis and this young, talented group are making a real, genuine run. Lane Hutson might be the most exciting young defenseman in the league, not named Cale Makar or Quinn Hughes. And if Montreal wins this series and gets to the Eastern Conference Finals, you can bet the entire country will be watching. Colorado versus Minnesota. Colorado was looking pretty unbeatable through the first 2 rounds. They won Game 1, 9-6. Then Game 2, 5-2. And then Minnesota woke up a little bit, taking Game 3. It was won by the Wild after they scored 3 goals in the first few minutes and forced a goalie change. The Avalanche went with Mackenzie Blackwood after pulling Scott Wedgwood. The Wild opened Game 3 with 3 straight goals. Kirill Kaprizov was magnificent, scoring first, assisting on the next 2, and Minnesota handed the Avalanche their first loss of the playoffs. And so yeah, they really maybe exposed something in Colorado. Who knows? We'll see how Game 4 checks out. Minnesota grabbed the early lead and with one in the first few minutes of the second period. Game 4 is tomorrow night, so that's Monday. This series is and has been a chess match. Colorado's power is their offensive depth, obviously, with McKinnon, Makar, their top 6. Minnesota counters with Quinn Hughes. Let's not forget Nazem Kadri. You got Quinn Hughes, as we said, Kaprizov, Boldy up front. Both teams have star power at every position. Game 4 will tell us whether the Wild can make a real series of this or whether the Avalanche course correct and get back in control. Vegas and Anaheim. Vegas leads the series 2-1. Game 1 saw the Knights take a 3-1 victory. The Ducks won Game 2 with a 3-1 victory. Starting to almost sound like a broken record there, but the Golden Knights won 6-2 in Game 3. Mitch Marner had the hat-trick in that one. So after their stunning first-round upset of the Oilers, which wasn't that stunning if you look at the Oilers' goaltending situation, the Ducks have hit a wall a bit against a more experienced Vegas squad. Mitch Marner and Jack Eichel have been excellent. Anaheim needs to regroup a little bit heading into Game 4 tonight. That's the late game, at least on the eastern side of things. Well, it's the late game on the western side too, just not as late. Lucas Dostal has had a tougher time in round 2, and the Golden Knights' depth has been on full display, especially in Game 3. The Ducks are still dangerous, so don't count them out. They came back from deficits in 3 games against the Oilers. They have a young core, Carlson, Lacombe, and Gauthier. Those guys don't panic, so you can bet that they will be okay. Losing 2 of 3, including a 6-2 blowout, it's a different kind of challenge. And if Vegas wins tonight and takes the 3-1 series lead, that would be pretty hard for Anaheim to overcome. Switching gears, new sport. We'll get back to hockey in a few moments, but we're going to talk NBA. So the NBA second round is producing some really incredible basketball across the board, unless you are the Philadelphia 76ers. So let's go series by series. There's a lot happening. You have the New York Knicks up 3-0. Game 4 is today, so by the time you see this, you'll know whether they swept or not. The Knicks won Game 1 by 39 points. Then in Game 2, it was 108-102, so 6 points. That's a bit of a better deficit. Then 108-94 in Game 3. Right now, the Knicks are the overwhelming favorite. They're overwhelming the Sixers at every turn. Jalen Brunson scored 33 in Game 3, and the Knicks held the 76ers to 29% from three-point range. Mikal Bridges added 23 points. Basically, Philly's only hope right now is Tyrese Maxey. He's been their best player, as you would hope. But the Knicks have had an answer for everything. Joel Embiid is one loss away from a very early offseason. Joel Embiid is famous for not showing up in the playoffs, so this isn't altogether surprising that he hasn't really been that great. The Sixers need to win today to inch a little bit closer back in this series. And for a team that just came back from a 3-1 deficit to the Boston Celtics, there is precedent there, but this is a completely different beast. If the Knicks sweep, and it sure seems like they have a chance to, it'll be one of the most dominant second round series in recent history. I have an old friend from high school who lives in New York, and I know they will be cheering loudly. The Detroit Pistons are leading the Cleveland Cavaliers 2-1 in that series. And Detroit is pretty much the Cinderella story of the NBA this year. Nobody thought they would have the record they did heading into the playoffs as basically the best team in the East. They made tough work of Orlando in the first round. They are leading the Cavaliers 2-1. This is a surprise series of the entire second round. The Cavaliers, who are the 4 seed coming in, have been overwhelmed by Detroit. Cade Cunningham scoring 25 points as Detroit beat Cleveland 107-97 to take a 2-0 series lead. Donovan Mitchell led the way with 35, while James Harden had the critical late game baskets for Cleveland, who cut Detroit's lead to 2-1. Game 4 is Monday night at 8, so you'll know the result by the time you see this. The Raptors fans who are watching this, and you're watching it because your season ended in Game 7, our season ended in Game 7, as it were. On one hand, you wanted Cleveland to lose because they knocked you out. On the other hand, if Detroit makes a deep run, it validates just how hard it was to take down the East top seed. And either way, it could have been the Raptors taking on the Pistons. And so, yeah, this series has been everything you kind of hoped it would be. And we'll see how it turns out. Switching to the West now. You got the Oklahoma City Thunder leading the Los Angeles Lakers 3-0. This is a tough series because one thing we know, if you've watched NBA basketball the last couple of years, the whistle is definitely slanted towards the Oklahoma City Thunder. However, seeing it happen to LeBron James as a Raptors fan and seeing the whistle go his way all those years when he was playing against the Raptors in the playoffs in the Eastern Conference, it's kind of nice to see it coming back to get him. You'd like a fair series, but at the same time, we want those Lakers on the golf course rather than in the next round of the playoffs. So try to be as unbiased as we can here at True North Sports Talk Podcast, but I would love to see a Spurs OKC Western Conference Final. I would love to see the Spurs beat OKC to get to the NBA Championship, possibly against those New York Knicks. And I think that would make a great final with a lot of storylines, and then just call it down the middle if you're the referees and see where the chips may fall. However, it remains to be seen. Ajay Mitchell, who is filling in as a starter with Jalen Williams injured due to a hamstring issue, continued his good series. The Thunder are just better at this point in every phase of the game. LeBron, as you can imagine, is fighting hard. His son Bronny had those historic moments in round one. But at this point, OKC has more depth, they have more defense, and they are just way younger. Game 4 is on Monday, so we'll know by the time this airs whether they swept or not. If OKC sweeps the Lakers, it sets up one of the most anticipated Western Conference Finals matchups in years. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander against whoever comes out of the other series. SGA has been quietly magnificent. He had 23 points in Game 3 on limited efficiency, but the team's execution covered up for what he might have lacked, even though 23 points is still nothing to sneeze at. This is a complete basketball team, and contrary to what some people might believe, it's not just a one-man band. The San Antonio Spurs, which is kind of my dark horse team in all of this, lead the Minnesota Timberwolves 2-1. This series is the one everyone is watching because it's Victor Wembanyama dueling against Anthony Edwards. The Spurs are leading 2-1 heading into Game 4. In Game 3, Wembanyama delivered a stat line that would have made Hakeem Olajuwon, Shaquille O'Neal, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar blush. And yes, that is accurate. Wembanyama matched Olajuwon, Shaq, and Kareem with his Game 3 stat line. So let's say that one more time. Victor Wembanyama, at 22 years old, posted a playoff stat line in his first career postseason that only 3 of the greatest centers in NBA history have ever matched. We are witnessing something generational, as we've known since Wembanyama came into the league, and San Antonio expected a late Minnesota run in Game 3, but this time the Spurs found a way to hold on for their first win at Target Center since 2022 to take a 2-1 series lead. So just one moment here, want to check on this. Still 5-1 in the top of the 8th for the Angels, looking to avoid the sweep there. To my left is the Blue Jays, as always. Alright, Anthony Edwards is doing everything he can. His knee that was hurt against Denver has been getting better with each game, which means he will be getting better with each game. The thing about Wemby, though, he presents a matchup problem that nobody in the NBA currently has any real answer for. That guy is long, he is accurate, and he is just hard to play against. Game 4 is today. And if San Antonio takes the 3-1 lead, the Timberwolves will have an enormous mountain named Wembanyama to climb. Bigger picture, we're heading towards conference finals in both sports at the same time. The pictures are getting clearer, with Carolina already in their Eastern Conference final. In the NBA East, you got the Knicks, who are almost through to the East Finals, and then they will take on whoever wins the Pistons Cavs. In the West, you got OKC and San Antonio looking like they're probably on a collision course. We shall see though. Minnesota definitely will have something to say about it. It would be shocking if LA came back at this point. So this could be a Western Conference final, which could be the most hyped individual matchup since LeBron Curry. And that would include obviously SGA and Wembanyama. In the NHL, Carolina's waiting on Buffalo, Montreal, Colorado or Minnesota in the West against Vegas or Anaheim on the other side. And those playoffs are delivering must-see every night. Switching gears back to hockey now, we're going a league down though to the OHL, and you have the Kitchener Rangers taking on the Barrie Colts in the OHL finals. The Rangers open the OHL Championship Series Wednesday, May 6th at home, and they are still on a roll. Kitchener leads the series 2-0. Game 1 had Kitchener 5, Barrie 2. Game 2 had Barrie 3, Kitchener 4. That game went to overtime. Game 3 is tonight, so we'll know that outcome by the time this airs, and possibly one more. And the Kitchener Rangers are basically 2 wins from that berth in the Memorial Cup and the OHL Championship. They haven't done that since 2008, so that's almost 20 years ago. So that sets the stage for how we got here. The Rangers swept through the first 2 rounds with losses to spare, won the Western Conference over Windsor in 5 games on Dylan Edwards' dramatic overtime winner. And then they waited while the Eastern Conference final went to 7 games between Brantford and Barrie. Ben Herbeck was remarkable in the Eastern Conference final, building off a 54-save performance in Game 6 with a 40-save shutout in Game 7, backstopping the Barrie Colts to a 5-0 win over the Brantford Bulldogs. So the Rangers get Barrie, who came in battle-hardened and riding their goaltender. Kitchener came out swinging. Game 1 at the odd, Kitchener wins 5-2. The Rangers' McNeil scored twice in Game 1. As you might imagine, and I can confirm this knowing someone who was there, the odd was electric. The energy of an OHL finals game in that building for the first time in 18 years was something special for this community. Game 2 was the dramatic one. Barrie pushed back hard in Game 2 and took the Rangers to overtime before Adanovsky scored the game-winning goal to give Kitchener a 4-3 overtime victory and a 2-0 series lead. That's the Rangers' character right there, though, down to an overtime game, and then they find a way. Let's talk about who's making this happen for those Rangers, because the individual stories in this run have been pretty compelling. Mid-season acquisition, Sam O'Reilly. Let's start with him. He's a Tampa Bay Lightning prospect, and he's become the heart of this team's offense. He finished the Windsor series with 20 points in 13 games, continues to be the most dangerous forward on the ice every time he steps on it. He was that way in the World Juniors. CBC's coverage leading to the finals featured O'Reilly front and center, and he delivered in Game 1 of the championship series. He said, "I'm really excited and ready to get going. It's a great honor to be in the OHL finals." As quoted Sam Riley at the media conference the day before Game 1. Then you have the hero of the Windsor series, Dylan Edwards, two-time OHL Player of the Week during the playoff run, the overtime hero who sent Kitchener to the finals in the first place. He's being consistent, he's being clutch, which is almost more important than consistent, and he carries real NHL draft appeal. Do you hear that, Toronto Maple Leafs? He's been a better player than Gavin McKenna this year. Just saying. If the Rangers hoist the Robertson Cup, Edwards is going to be a key reason. Christian Kirsch, the San Jose Sharks goaltending prospect, 11 wins, just 2 losses in the playoffs. Guy makes 29 saves in Game 5 in the overtime against Windsor. He's been everything a junior hockey goaltender needs to be in the playoffs. Calm, consistent, and on occasion able to steal a game with a save here and there. Jared Woolley, the LA Kings defensive prospect, again mid-season acquisition. He's played major minutes on the top defensive pairing, logging around 27 minutes a night. That is a lot of ice time. He set the table on a lot of the offensive chances through the Windsor series. And this is his final year of junior hockey, and he is going out in style. And let's not forget the coaching. UC Iokas has this team very well prepared. They play disciplined hockey, and every single line is able to contribute. Luke Ellenis came back from a November injury to score in the clutch against Windsor. Luca Romano scored an OT and set up in the clincher. Cameron Arquette, Gabriel Chariot, or Chariot, however you want to say that, Christian Humphreys. There is no real weak link in this lineup. The challenge for Barrie, though, is very, very real. Ben Herbeck is in goal. He's proven he can steal games with that 54 save, 40 save game. Their power play has been the best in the playoffs, so as long as Kitchener can stay out of the box, that kind of mitigates that weapon. And Barrie knows how to win in hostile environments. They've been doing it all throughout the first 2 rounds. Again, they just won a Game 7 in Brantford. Going home for Games 3 and 4 will likely energize them unless Kitchener hits quick and fast in Game 3. So Game 3 is tonight. Game 4 is Tuesday, so we'll know both of those outcomes before we get there. So both in Barrie, if necessary. Game 5 is Thursday in Kitchener. If Kitchener wins Games 3 and 4, it won't matter. They will win the OHL championship. That would be the story of the entire playoffs. The Rangers playing with purpose after being swept in this round last year against London. Sorry to kind of mention that, but they're not having to face them this year. Going into hostile territory and closing it out. Kitchener fans will be watching Game 3 tonight, and this could be a very short series. So we have a challenge going on in the Blue Jays game right now. An out call at first. It's looking possibly... Let's see. Hard to tell from that angle. Like potentially he got it right though. So we'll see. It's taking a long time. So this challenge is for real. It's very close. The call in the field might stand, which means there's not enough to overturn it. And so we shall see where it ends up. But it's taking a very long time, this challenge. I'm just doing this little talk right here as we're going to lead into our baseball talk today. And so, yeah, just getting ready for it. Just want to see what the outcome is. And one of the longest challenges of the year so far. Blue Jays need base runners right now. They're struggling. Field on the call on the field stands. So there wasn't enough evidence to overturn the call. Doesn't mean it was right or wrong. It just means they couldn't definitively say one way or the other. So basically, tie goes to the runner. If you're an old school baseball fan, you know what I mean by that. And now let's dive into our baseball talk. And this is a tribute to one of the early builders in Blue Jays history. He was a key figure in Atlanta Braves history. One Robert Joe Cox, that we all lovingly knew as Bobby Cox, born May 21st, 1941 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was very close to his 85th birthday. He was a Hall of Fame manager, a World Series champion, albeit not with the Blue Jays, and the man who took the Blue Jays to their first ever playoff appearance. He passed away yesterday, Saturday, May 9th, 2026, at the age of 84. Baseball as a whole lost a real legend. This city and every Blue Jays fan feels that loss, especially if you're of an age where you remember him as the manager of the Blue Jays. Before we get into the numbers and the legacy, let's just acknowledge this. Bobby Cox died on the same day that the Atlanta Braves, one of the teams he is most known for, are sitting in first place in the National League East. The high-flying Atlanta Braves are in first place. As Bobby Cox passes on, it's fitting. The game he built, the team he transformed, leading the standings as he moved on. If you write that in a movie, people would say it was too on the nose. Now, let's start where, for me at least, the story began, and that is the Blue Jays chapter. He came in 1982. That was a few years before I was born, but he was still there after the fact. So I do vaguely remember him as the manager. In 1982, the Blue Jays were 5 seasons into their existence. They were a young expansion franchise, lovable but limited. General manager Pat Gillick, who I remember very fondly, needed a manager who could develop talent, earn the trust of the young players, and lay a foundation for something special. Pat Gillick chose Bobby Cox. Cox and Gillick had a friendship that went back to their days with the Yankees organization. His time with Toronto allowed him to be with one of his closest friends, Pat Gillick, who at the time was the Blue Jays general manager, and together they built something extraordinary in 4 short years. Cox managed Toronto from 82 to 85, taking them from a budding expansion franchise to a legitimate championship threat. No other Blue Jays manager in team history has won as many games in a single season as Bobby Cox did when he got the Blue Jays to a 99-62 record. During that 1985 season, which culminated in Toronto's first AL East division title. 99 wins, the second best record in all of baseball. that season. The drive of 85, that phrase still carries a lot of weight in the city of Toronto. To a generation of Blue Jays fans who watched that season unfold, Pat had told, so this is a quote from Bobby Cox, Pat had told me that there were a lot of young kids coming. They may not be quite ready to win yet, but it didn't take us long to do something. This is a quote from Bobby Cox's Hall of Fame induction. And he said, in those 4 years up there, so meaning in Toronto, I had as much fun probably as I've ever had in the game of baseball. Considering what he did in Atlanta, that's a pretty special statement. Now let's go back and review. Think about who was on that Blue Jays roster. Dave Stieb. If you don't know who Dave Stieb was and what he was all about, please go back and watch his video. Check out Brooke Knows Ball and her video about how much of a monster Dave Stieb was on the mound. And because Dave Stieb played in Toronto, he just did not get the recognition he deserved. He was this close to no-hitting multiple times until he finally did it in 1990 against Cleveland. The first and only so far no-hitter in Blue Jays history. But he was right there so many times before and after that no-hitter. So you had Dave Stieb, you had Jesse Barfield, you had George Bell, Lloyd Mosby, one of my favorite Blue Jays of all time, Tony Fernandez. You had Damaso Garcia, Willie Upshaw. These were the players Cox believed in, developed, and placed in positions to succeed. And in 1983, he led them to the franchise's first winning record ever. 2 years later, in 1985, a division title. Who was another Anaheim home run? Lauer, you just are not okay right now. The 1985 ALCS against the Kansas City Royals remains one of the most heartbreaking moments in Canadian sports history. The Blue Jays led that series 3-1. One more win and they were in the World Series, but they lost 3 straight, and a generation of fans remember those games with a particular kind of pain. Cox brought those pitchers back on short rest. It didn't work. Kansas City went on to win the World Series that year. And those last 3 games will haunt Blue Jays fans who lived through it for as long as we are able to remember it. Here's the thing though, and this is crucial. Without Bobby Cox, there's no 85 ALCS. There's no first division title, at least for another long while. And there's no foundation necessarily for what came later, which is Cito Gaston and the 92-93. And what might have been the 94 Blue Jays? There's a conspiracy theory out there we'll cover in a little bit. The Toronto Blue Jays hired Cox as their manager in 82. Cito Gaston was brought in as a coach for the team. He was a hitting coach with the team because of Bobby Cox. And Gaston would be named the manager for the Jays just a few short years later. That is a connection that runs straight through to the 92-93 World Series. And Bobby Cox brought Cito Gaston to Toronto. Cito Gaston won those back-to-back World Series. And so that lineage is direct. You also had players like Tony Fernandez, at least on the 93 World Series, that are a direct line back to that as well. After the 1985 ALCS, the Braves came calling. Staying in Toronto seemed inevitable until a few weeks after that division title was won, when the Braves called to offer the job of GM and a chance to return to Atlanta to be with his wife Pam and his family. They had maintained a residence in Georgia during his time in Toronto, and Cox went back home to Atlanta. And Toronto at that point lost one of the great ones. But what he left behind, though, was a franchise that was transformed. There was a culture of winning, there was stability, there was a foundation there that Cox had established in 4 years at Exhibition Stadium. And that is why the Blue Jays were able to compete through the late 1980s and up until about 1994. His fingerprints are all over the championships that we're able to follow. Now, just quickly, there is a theory out there that the best team in baseball in 1994 at the time of the strike, which was mid-season, which is very odd for a strike to happen mid-season. It's never happened before, at least in my lifetime, and has never happened since. But that mid-season strike halted, and what ultimately led to the downfall of the Montreal Expos. There are some who believe that the 1994 World Series very easily could have been, because if you remember, the 94 Blue Jays were on a run at the time of the strike, that it could have been Montreal-Toronto in the World Series, and that there are people who didn't want that, and that's why the strike took place. That's just a little tinfoil hat for your Wednesday evening, but that's an interesting thought. Back to Bobby Cox now. What Bobby Cox did in Atlanta deserves its own chapter in baseball history. He arrived as general manager in 1986. He had never held a front office job before in his life. But what he did was he built a team that would dominate the entire National League for well over 15 years. While serving as the Braves GM from 85 to 1990, Cox understood the need to place an emphasis on pitching while overhauling the farm system. Now, where might he have learned a lot of that, and whose ear might he have bent to figure some of those things out? Well, he was, as it was mentioned, a very close friend of one Pat Gillick. He oversaw Tom Glavine's development, traded for a Tigers minor leaguer named John Smoltz. That guy became pretty good. Drafted Steve Avery. He famously took Chipper Jones with the first overall pick in the 1990 draft. And don't forget one Greg Maddux. So let's stop on that Smoltz trade for a moment. He executed one of the best trades in Braves club history, swapping pitcher Doyle Alexander to the Tigers on August 12, 1987 for then prospect John Smoltz. He went on to become a Hall of Famer with 213 wins, 154 saves. Cox gave up a pitcher they needed right then to get a minor leaguer who became a Hall of Famer. That is elite front office work. That is vision. And that is something not a lot of managers would have the cojones to pull off. And then in 1990, with the team still struggling, he fired the manager that they had at the time and took the job himself. So from that moment, June of 1990, all the way through to 2000, and then up to 2010, for the next 20 years, Bobby Cox was the manager of the Atlanta Braves. And what he built was probably the most sustained run of excellence that any franchise has produced, not only in the modern era, but in any era of any pro sport. Maybe the Boston Celtics of a certain era might have something to say with 11 championships. But 20 plus years of excellence. Bobby Cox had 2,504 victories as a manager, ranked 4th in Major League history. 15 division titles, 5 pennants, 1 World Series championship, which happened in 1995. He became the first manager to exceed 3 consecutive appearances in the League Championship Series. He went from 91 to 99, with the exception of said 1994, as the league champions. From 91 to 2005, that's 15 years. Again, except for 1994, the Braves won their division every single year. So there was no champion crowned in 1994. In those 15 years, they had 5 Hall of Fame pitchers. Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, John Smoltz, and then later Glavine returned after going to, I believe, the Mets. Greg Maddux ended up going to Chicago for a while. Smoltzy went to Boston for a bit. They had Chipper Jones, Fred McGriff, David Justice, Andrew Jones. These were championship caliber rosters. Don't forget they had Otis Nixon back in the day. They had all kind of really good players come through Atlanta. Cox managed them with a rare blend of trust and accountability. This guy had 162 ejections in his career. That's an entire season worth of rejections. As a major league umpire, Dan Iasonia said at Cox's retirement celebration, he was one of the best managers I've ever worked with because you know where he stands at all times on the field. You will never be surprised by one of his actions ever. Bobby protects his players at all times, and what a lot of people don't realize is he gets thrown out of a lot of games, but his players don't. That is a true leader. Bobby Cox got thrown out so his players didn't have to be. That is the essence of leadership. That is why every player who ever played for him speaks so highly about him with a certain amount of reverence. Current Braves manager, Walt Weiss, his quote is, "What an honor to have been a part of his legacy." Really, he was one of the greatest leaders I'd ever been around. Walt Weiss played for Bobby as a player. He was the best I'd ever been around at creating loyalty amongst the group. It was the way he treated people, the way he encouraged guys. Bobby always made you feel like you were playing better than you actually were. That's the quote. Freddie Freeman said, "Not many people get to be managed at all by a Hall of Fame manager." John Smoltz offered perhaps one of the most insightful tributes, saying, "Bobby had an uncanny ability to put guys in position to succeed and then lean on them and show that he trusted them. He learned to trust the foundation that he put on the field, and he gave us a lot of respect." That is very, very meaningful. Now, more collision between Blue Jays and the Braves. In 1992, the World Series, Cox's Atlanta Braves faced Pat Gillick and the Blue Jays. One of the greatest ironies in baseball history. The Blue Jays won that series in 6 games. We all remember it. Mike Timlin tossing the ball to Joe Carter. The man who built Toronto's foundation faced the team he built, and both won something profound that October. In 1995, he finally got the ring that he had been working for. Atlanta defeated Cleveland in 6 games. Bobby Cox was a World Series champion. And if you watch the footage from that celebration, he is not on the podium soaking in the attention. He is surrounded by his players, shaking their hands, hugging them, pointing at them as if to say, "This belongs to you." And that is who he was. He was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2014. He finished his career with 2,504 wins, 15 first-place finishes, the most of any manager in history, and an impact on the game that is still being felt to this day and will be felt for generations. To the Toronto Blue Jays fans, Bobby Cox gave us our first winning record, our first division title, the Drive of 85. He gave us Cito Gaston. He gave us a reason to believe that this franchise could compete. And everything that followed traces back to those 4 years, including last year's World Series run. He will never be forgotten here, as long as there is a team. So, without further ado, rest in peace, Bobby Cox, and thank you from this fan. Thank you for everything. Alright, y'all. That's it for today's very emotional episode of True North Sports Talk. Hopefully you enjoyed it. We covered the NHL second round, Carolina's history-making run, the NBA's second round, the Knicks going for the sweep, OKC on the verge, Wembanyama looking for more greatness, Barry and Kitchener facing off. We honor Bobby Cox, the Blue Jays' first playoff manager, the man who built the 85 Drive of 85, the architect of the Braves dynasty through the 90s and early 2000s, and one of the best human beings the game of baseball has ever seen, gone at 84, but he will not be forgotten. So, if you could, use hashtag True North Sports Talk, share us a Bobby Cox memory, share us a prediction, let us know and leave us a review of any type, hit us up, let us know what you think. And the most important thing though is hit that subscribe button at the bottom of the screen so that we can continue bringing you this content. So until next time, keep cheering on your favorite team, and we will see you then.